Put yourself in Canton, Ohio. It's New Year's Day, 1953, and you are standing in a packed auditorium with maybe 3,000 other people.
Right. And outside, the Appalachian Mountains are just buried under this massive, blinding snowstorm.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of bitter, bone-chilling whiteout that completely grounds flights and paralyzes highways. And inside, the crowd is getting really restless.
I mean, you've all bought tickets to see the biggest star in the country.
Right. But the opener is done, the intermission is dragged on way too long, and, the headliner is nowhere to be found.
The anticipation in that room would have been electric, but also definitely tilting toward anger.
Oh, absolutely.
This wasn't just any performer they were waiting for. This was a man who had completely redefined American popular music over the previous 5 years.
So finally, the local promoter walks out onto the stage, the crowd quiets down, and the promoter grabs the microphone and announces, just bluntly, that the star of the show will not be performing.
What?
Actually, he announces that the star of the show is dead. And here is the detail that is just so hard to wrap your head around. The crowd bursts into laughter.
Right. They actually laugh.
You and everyone around you start laughing, cheering, assuming this is like an elaborate practical joke, a publicity stunt. The promoter has to stand there and watch 3,000 people laugh at a tragedy because they just refuse to believe it.
Well, they thought it was part of the act. The persona of this artist was so chaotic, so steeped in wild behavior that dying on the way to a show sounded like a punchline he would have written himself.
But out in the freezing snow, parked at an all-night gas station hours away in Oak Hill, West Virginia, a terrified college kid is staring into the backseat of his car.
Yeah.
He had been hired just to drive the artist to the gig. But the man in the back seat isn't sleeping. He has been dead for so long that rigor mortis has already set in. The body is completely stiff.
It's just a horrifying image.
The man in the back seat was Hank Williams. He was 29 years old.
29. I mean, that image, the absolute pinnacle of American fame, frozen in the back of a hired car driven by a total stranger. It's the defining paradox of his life.
And that paradox is exactly what we are going to explore today. We are taking a deep dive into the life, the meteoric rise, the tragic spiral, and the massive cultural footprint of Hiram Hank Williams.
We've got some incredible source material for this.
We do. We are working from an extensive biographical text that chronicles everything from his painful childhood in rural Alabama to the bitter, multi-generational legal wars over his estate that basically raged for decades after he died.
Right.
Our mission today is to strip away the mythology. We want to look past the whole caricature of the hillbilly Shakespeare and really uncover the intensely human mechanics of a man who literally could not read a single note of sheet music, but somehow, wrote the playbook for modern country music.
To understand the weight of that Canton, Ohio audience laughing at his death, we first need to establish the sheer scale of his career. Hank Williams wasn't just some popular regional singer. He was a cultural monolith. In a career that barely spanned half a decade in the national spotlight, he recorded 55 singles that reached the top 10 of the Billboard charts.
55?
Yeah, and 12 of those went to #1. I mean, he didn't just define the genre of country music, he laid the foundational architecture for modern popular music.
The artists who cite him as a primary influence read like a history of rock and folk, right? Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, Elvis Presley.
Exactly. And the central mystery of his life is really this: how did a man whose existence was entirely chaotic, professionally unreliable, and tragically short manage to create art of such poignant simplicity that it was awarded a posthumous Pulitzer Prize nearly 60 years after his death?
The answer to that starts with the physical reality of his body. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to go back to 1923 to the rural community of Mount Olive, Alabama.
Right.
He is born Hiram Williams, though actually whoever filled out his birth certificate misspelled it as Hiram. Yeah, but the spelling of his name is completely irrelevant compared to the medical condition he was born with. He had a congenital defect called spina bifida occulta.
And this is the absolute bedrock of his biography. Spina bifida occulta is a malformation of the spinal column. The occulta part of the diagnosis is critical too.
What does that mean exactly?
It means hidden. Unlike more severe forms of spina bifida where the spinal cord might actually protrude through the back, occulta is internal.
Okay.
There is a structural defect, like a gap in the bones of the spine, but it's covered by skin. For Williams, this invisible defect meant he lived his entire life in a state of chronic, grinding back pain.
So it's not just like a bad back from a lifting injury. It is a fundamental flaw in his skeletal architecture from day one. It's like his spine was the geological fault line of his entire life.
That's a great way to put it.
Every earthquake that happens later, the drinking, the pills, the erratic behavior, it all originates from this physical crack.
Precisely. His spine was fundamentally unstable. The nerves are unprotected in certain areas, leading to radiating pain, numbness, and severe discomfort with prolonged standing or physical exertion.
And the medical infrastructure back then must have been terrible.
Oh, the medical infrastructure of rural Alabama in the 1920s had absolutely nothing to offer a child with this condition. There was no physical therapy, no targeted pain management, no surgical intervention. You just lived with the agony. It is the crucial context for every single behavioral issue that emerges later in his life.
But the physical pain was almost immediately compounded by the collapse of his family structure. When Hank is 7, his father, Alonzo, essentially vanishes from his life.
Right, Alonzo was a World War I veteran working as a railroad engineer.
Yeah, and he starts experiencing facial paralysis. So doctors at a Veterans Affairs clinic discover a brain aneurysm.
The treatment protocol for a brain aneurysm in the late 1920s and early 1930s was, well, rudimentary at best. Alonzo was transferred to a VA medical center in Louisiana and remained institutionalized there for 8 solid years.
8 years.
He was completely removed from the family dynamic during Hank's most formative years.
Which drops the entire burden of survival onto his mother, Lily. And the timing couldn't be worse. This is the onset of the Great Depression. The economic reality in southern Alabama is just incredibly grim.
Very grim.
But Lily refuses to let her family sink. She steps into the vacuum left by Alonzo and becomes an absolute force of nature. I mean, she is pragmatic, relentless, and fiercely domineering.
Lily's survival instinct really dictated the family's entire existence. They were essentially economic nomads, moving from town to town in southern Alabama, looking for any angle to make a living.
Yeah.
She opens boarding houses, she takes jobs in a local cannery, she works the night shift as a nurse in a hospital.
There's a story in the source material that perfectly illustrates the environment Hank grew up in. At one point, their house literally burns to the ground. They lose absolutely everything. Lily doesn't pause to mourn. She immediately moves the family to another street, opens a new boarding house, and plants a massive garden. She then sends Hank and his sister Irene out into the town to sell the crops they grew.
That pragmatism extended to the children as well. The environment bred a kind of ruthless hustle. Irene, who is just a young girl at the time, actually corners U.S. Representative J. Lister Hill during a local campaign stop.
A young girl just walks right up to a congressman.
Yes. She ignores all the political pomp and circumstance, confronts a sitting congressman, and demands that he intervene to secure her father's delayed disability pension.
And he actually does it. She gets the pension.
She does. It shows you the level of sheer will operating in that household. Lily taught her children that nobody was going to save them. They had to extract what they needed from the world by force or by hustle.
But Lily's relentless work schedule had a side effect, She was working the cannery, running the boarding house, and doing night shifts. She simply wasn't around during the day. Hank was left largely unsupervised.
Right.
And because he had this spinal condition, he wasn't out doing heavy manual labor or playing rough sports. He just wandered the streets. Now, his earliest exposure to music came from sitting next to his mother at the organ in the Mount Olive Baptist Church.
Yeah, he absorbed the emotional cadence of gospel music there.
But the trajectory of his life fundamentally shifts when he is about 8 years old, and Lily buys him a secondhand guitar for $3.50.
To put that in perspective, $3.50 during the deepest trough of the Great Depression was a massive sum for a struggling single mother.
Oh, for sure.
It wasn't a toy, it was an investment. She saw an aptitude in him, or perhaps just a way to keep him occupied and out of trouble.
By this point, the family has moved to Georgiana, Alabama. Hiram has started calling herself Hank because he thinks it sounds more like a country music star.
Naturally.
He has this guitar, but he doesn't really know how to make it sing. That is, until he crosses paths with an older black street performer named Rufus T. Tot Payne.
Rufus Payne was a blues musician who played the streets and the train stations. He was a real fixture in the local black community, playing a mix of blues, ragtime, and popular songs.
Hank essentially shadows this man. He is this skinny, awkward white kid following an older black bluesman around a segregated southern town, and they work out an arrangement.
Right. T-Tot agrees to give Hank guitar lessons.
Exactly. And in exchange, Hank brings T-Tot money when he has it, or more often, hot meals prepared by Lily from the boarding house kitchen.
The cultural exchange happening here cannot be overstated. When we look at the mechanics of what T-Tot actually taught him, it wasn't just chord progressions.
What else did he teach him?
He taught rhythm. He taught Hank the concept of the driving syncopated beat that propels the blues forward. Even more critically, he taught him showmanship.
Showmanship? What do you mean by showmanship in the context of street performing?
Well, on the street, you don't have a captive audience, right? You have to force people to stop walking, listen, and give you money.
Oh, that makes sense.
T-Tot taught Hank how to physically command attention, how to stoop over the guitar, how to bow, and most importantly, how to use his voice as a physical instrument.
Sure.
He taught him how to weave actual laughs, moans, and cries into the vocal delivery of a song.
So the very foundation of Hank Williams' sound, the sound that goes on to define white rural country music for a century, is actually a direct, unfiltered translation of a black street performer's blues technique.
Yes.
It's essentially hillbilly storytelling bolted onto a blues chassis. Think about the music you listen to today. How much of it traces back to this one street corner in Alabama where a bluesman played for a hot meal?
Exactly. And Williams never hid this fact. Later in his career, he openly stated that all the musical training he ever received in his life came from Rufus Payne. He even recorded a song called My Bucket's Got a Hole in It, which was a direct cover of a tune T-Tot had taught him on those streets.
Hank takes those street lessons and immediately tries to monetize them. He's 14 years old, and he enters a talent show at the Empire Theater in Montgomery. He wins first prize $15 by performing an original composition he called WPA Blues.
The WPA Blues is a fascinating early window into his creative process. The WPA was the Works Progress Administration, a massive New Deal agency that employed millions of people during the Depression.
Right, the federal labor program?
Yeah. A 14-year-old writing a song about a federal labor program shows that he is already closely observing the socioeconomic struggles around him. More importantly, he didn't compose the melody. He took a pre-existing tune and wrote his own lyrics over it.
Because he couldn't read or write sheet music.
Right. And he never learned. His entire compositional method for his whole life was taking a feeling or a story and humming a melody until it fit. He was a storyteller first, a musician second.
$15 was a lot of money back then, and it proved to Lily that this guitar thing wasn't just a hobby. It was a viable revenue stream. So in 1938, Hank decides to form a backup band, which he calls the Drifting Cowboys.
And naturally, Lily becomes the manager.
Of course she does.
Lily applied the same ruthless efficiency to the band that she applied to her boarding houses. She booked the shows. She negotiated the door splits. She drove the band in her own car to schoolhouses, movie theaters, and honky tonks across central and southern Alabama.
He is working so much that in October 1939, he officially drops out of high school. Music is now his full-time job. But as the touring ramps up, the physical toll on his body escalates.
Oh, absolutely.
Driving for hours over unpaved Alabama roads in the 1930s, standing on stage for 4 hours a night, this is catastrophic for a spine suffering from spina bifida occulta.
The friction between his ambition and his biology starts to generate sparks here. The pain is relentless, and because he has no access to modern orthopedic medicine, he turns to the cheapest, most accessible painkiller available in a southern honky tonk, which is alcohol.
Then the geopolitical landscape shifts. World War II breaks out. In 1941, the United States enters the war, and the military draft completely guts the Drifting Cowboys. His bandmates are sent overseas.
Yeah.
But Hank is left behind.
He was medically disqualified from military service. The physical exam quickly revealed his spinal defect. But it wasn't just the congenital issue. His back had sustained massive trauma shortly before the draft.
What happened?
He had decided to participate in a rodeo in Texas and was thrown from a bull.
A guy with spina bifida getting on a bucking bull seems like an insanely self-destructive choice.
It speaks to a level of recklessness, or perhaps a desperate need to prove his physical masculinity in a culture that highly prized physical toughness. The fall severely exacerbated his existing condition.
So, he is stuck in Montgomery, his band is gone, the pain is worse than ever, and he is drinking heavily to numb it.
And by August 1942, the drinking goes from a coping mechanism to a professional liability. He had secured a steady gig performing on the local Montgomery radio station, WSFA, but the station management fires him.
Really? Just outright fires him?
Yes. The official reason is habitual drunkenness.
Wow.
Live radio in the 1940s was a rigid, heavily scheduled business. You couldn't just show up when you felt like it. If a performer didn't walk up to the microphone at exactly 12:15 p.m., there was dead air. For a station manager, an unreliable performer, no matter how talented, was entirely useless.
This era produces a legendary backstage encounter, too. Here's where it gets really interesting. Hank crosses paths with Roy Acuff, who was, at the time, one of the biggest stars in country music and a pillar of the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah, Acuff was a giant.
Acuff looks at this messy, drunk, brilliant kid and tells him, "You've got $1 million voice, son, but a 10-cent brain."
From Acuff's perspective, as a seasoned professional and a shrewd businessman, it was an accurate assessment. He saw someone actively sabotaging a generational gift.
I have to push back on Acuff's assessment here, though. Was it really a 10-cent brain? That implies a moral failing, a lack of discipline, or just sheer stupidity.
Right.
But we know he is carrying around a spine that is literally crumbling. Is it fair to call him a self-sabotaging drunk when he is blindly self-medicating a crippling congenital disease?
It's a crucial debate. We have to separate the morality of addiction from the medical reality of 1942. If Hank Williams had been born in 1990, he would have had an MRI, targeted steroid injections, physical therapy, and precisely calibrated pharmacological pain management.
Exactly.
But in 1942, his only option was bourbon. But from Acuff's perspective, plenty of people in the rural South lived with severe physical pain. Farmers, miners, factory workers, and they didn't show up blackout drunk to their jobs.
That's fair.
The music industry demanded reliability. Hank's coping mechanism made him inherently unreliable. Both things can be true. He was in agonizing, untreated medical distress, and his reaction to that distress made him impossible to work with.
The firing from WSFA forces him out of music temporarily. He takes jobs working in shipyards during the war effort, first in Mobile, Alabama, and then he even travels out to Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, he tried the manual labor route.
But the shipyards don't last. He comes back to Alabama and he comes back to music. And this is where the dynamic of his career management violently shifts. At a medicine show in 1943, he meets a woman named Audrey Shepard.
Let's explain what a medicine show was, because it sounds totally antiquated now. These were traveling spectacles where salesmen would peddle patent medicines, usually tonics, that were mostly alcohol and snake oil.
Right.
To draw a crowd in rural towns, they would hire musicians to play on the back of a truck. That's the circuit Hank was grinding out when he met Audrey.
And Audrey is not a passive bystander. She is incredibly ambitious. She takes one look at Hank and realizes she has found a vehicle to get out of rural poverty.
Absolutely.
They get married in 1944, and they get married at a Texaco gas station, which tells you everything you need to know about the chaotic velocity of their relationship.
Audrey immediately moves to usurp Lily's role as Hank's manager. The power struggle between his mother and his new wife was intense. Audrey wanted him off the local honky tonk circuit and on the national stage.
I read she even tried to be in the band.
She did. She forced her way into the band, sometimes standing in to play guitar or sing, despite lacking Hank's natural talent.
Under Audrey's aggressive management, they decide to aim for the absolute top of the mountain, Nashville, Tennessee, and the Grand Ole Opry. In 1946, they travel to Nashville, and Hank auditions for the Opry.
And he gets rejected flat out.
They don't want him. But Audrey refuses to pack up and go back to Alabama. She decides that if they can't get into the Opry, they will go after a publishing deal.
They target Acuff Rose Music. This was a newly formed publishing company founded by Roy Acuff, the same man who gave Hank the 10-cent brain speech, and a brilliant songwriter and businessman named Fred Rose.
The way they get Fred Rose's attention sounds like a scene from a movie. Audrey marches into the WSM radio studios looking for the president of the company.
Right.
She finds Fred Rose, but he is in the middle of his daily, highly competitive ping pong game. She doesn't wait for him to finish. She walks right up to the table and demands that he listen to her husband sing a song right then and there.
And Rose agrees. He puts down the paddle, listens to Hank sing, and experiences an immediate paradigm shift. Rose realizes that this young man, who cannot read a single bar of sheet music, is a profoundly gifted lyricist.
Why does the publishing company care so much about his songwriting? Wouldn't a record label just want a good singer?
Well, you have to understand the mechanics of the music industry in the 1940s. The primary revenue stream for a publisher wasn't the physical record, it was the sheet music. Before mass commercial radio syndication and jukebox ubiquity, people bought sheet music to play on their pianos at home. A publisher like Fred Rose wanted songs that other artists would want to record and that families would want to buy the sheet music for. When Rose heard Hank, he heard copyrights.
This creates the most vital triad of Hank's career. You have Hank supplying the raw, unfiltered emotional genius. You have Audrey supplying the relentless bulldog aggression to force him into rooms he would never enter himself. And you have Fred Rose, who understands the actual mechanics of the music business.
It was a perfect storm of talent and management.
Rose signs Hank to a 6-song publishing contract. He secures him a recording deal with Sterling Records and eventually leverages that into a major deal with MGM Records.
Fred Rose really served as the translator between Hank's raw talent and the commercial market. He polished the edges, structured the recording sessions, and utilized his vast distribution network to get the songs heard.
The machinery starts working. In 1947, Hank hits it big with a track called Move It On Over. But the song that absolutely detonates his career, the one that makes him a national phenomenon, happens in 1949.
Lovesick Blues.
The song is Lovesick Blues. It goes to #1 on the Billboard country charts and stays locked there for 4 consecutive months.
Yeah.
But the craziest part of this milestone is that the definitive Hank Williams song, the track that solidifies his legacy as a songwriting genius, was not written by Hank Williams.
No, Lovesick Blues was actually a show tune written in 1922. It had been floating around for decades. But Hank didn't just cover the song, he transmuted it.
He essentially weaponized it.
That's a good way to put it. He applied everything T-Tot Payne had taught him. He injected it with this driving, syncopated rhythm. He added an incredibly difficult leaping yodel.
Wow.
He took a somewhat generic show tune and saturated it with rural vulnerability and blues timing. He essentially stole the song from history and made it entirely his own.
And the sheer commercial force of Lovesick Blues makes him impossible for the establishment to ignore. The Grand Ole Opry, the institution that rejected him just 3 years prior, finally invites him to perform.
June 11, 1949.
That's his Opry debut. He walks out onto the stage at the Ryman Auditorium, sings Lovesick Blues, and the audience absolutely loses its mind. The response is so deafening that the host has to call him back out for an encore, and then another.
Right.
He performs an unprecedented 6 encores. The crowd will not let him leave the stage.
That night cemented him as the biggest star in the genre. From 1949 to 1951, he enters a period of peak cultural saturation.
Yeah.
The hits are relentless. Cold, cold heart, hey, good looking, I'm so lonesome I could cry.
Just hit after hit.
He is earning an estimated $1,000 per show. In the early 1950s, that is a staggering amount of liquid wealth.
And his music starts breaking containment. It isn't just country fans buying the records anymore. The pop industry takes notice. Tony Bennett, who is a smooth, sophisticated popcorner from New York, records a cover of Hank's song Cold, Cold Heart in 1951.
That was a huge deal.
Bennett's version rockets to #1 on the pop charts and stays there for 27 weeks.
This was a seismic shift in American music. The pop establishment historically looked down on country music as hillbilly music, unsophisticated, and strictly regional.
Right.
Tony Bennett taking a Hank Williams composition to the top of the pop charts proved that Hank's songwriting wasn't regional, it was universally human.
But this massive fame introduces a severe problem for his brand. Hank is extremely complicated. On one hand, he is the king of the honky tonk. He writes drinking songs, cheating songs, and heartbreak anthems.
Yeah, that was his whole public image.
His public persona is tied to his chaotic, hard-drinking reality. But internally, he has this deeply moralistic, almost philosophical streak. He starts wanting to record these heavy, spoken-word sermons. He wants to recite poetry about societal injustice and moral decay.
And this absolutely terrified Fred Rose.
Why? If he's the biggest star in the world, shouldn't a publisher let him record whatever he wants?
Rose was looking at the physical mechanics of how music was consumed. A huge portion of Hank's revenue came from jukebox plays in bars and honky-tonks.
Okay.
Imagine a patron in a crowded bar, drops a nickel in the jukebox, selects a Hank Williams track, expecting an upbeat song like, "Hey, good looking." Instead, the room goes quiet, and Hank starts delivering a bleak, spoken-word sermon about the inevitability of death and moral judgment.
Oh yeah, that would clear a dance floor.
Rose knew that would alienate the core audience. It was terrible for the brand.
So they architect a brilliant workaround. They invent a pseudonym. They decide to release these heavy spoken-word tracks under the name Luke the Drifter.
It was a conscious severing of his public identity.
It's like a superhero's alter ego. Or maybe a villain's alter ego, depending on how you look at it. The Luke the Drifter persona allowed Hank, a man who is famous for drinking heavily and failing spectacularly in his personal life, to dispense serious, moralistic life advice without sounding to his audience like a massive hypocrite. If Hank Williams preached about the dangers of alcohol, people would laugh. But if Luke the Drifter, this mythical humble wanderer, said it, people would listen. It was a psychological release valve for his own guilt.
And the strategy worked perfectly. The jukeboxes stayed full of his hits, and the record store bins carried the Luke the Drifter records for those who wanted them. By the late summer of 1951, he is at the absolute zenith of his career.
He's doing massive national tours with Bob Hope. He makes an appearance on national television on the Perry Como show. He is completely untouchable.
But the entire empire is built on that crumbling spine. And in November 1951, the fault line finally ruptures.
Right.
Hank goes squirrel hunting with his fiddler, Jerry Rivers. They're out in the woods, and Hank attempts to leap across a small gully. He misses his footing and takes a severe fall.
Oh, man. The impact completely destabilized his already fragile spinal column, didn't it?
Yes. The spina bifida occulta, compounded by the rodeo injury years prior and now this fall, created a level of pain that was completely unmanageable. The nerves were compressed. He could barely walk.
He has no choice but to seek major medical intervention. In December 1951, he checks into Vanderbilt University Hospital in Nashville and undergoes a spinal fusion surgery.
We really need to be clear about what spinal fusion surgery looked like in 1951.
It wasn't pretty.
No. Today, it involves microscopic incisions and titanium hardware. In 1951, it was a brutal, invasive orthopedic procedure. They would open the back, strip the muscles away from the spine, and physically graft bone, often taken from the patient's own pelvis, onto the vertebrae to force them to heal together into a solid mass.
That sounds horrific.
The recovery is agonizing and requires months of strict immobility.
But Hank doesn't give it months. He is discharged from the hospital on Christmas Eve, explicitly against medical advice. He walks out of Vanderbilt wearing a heavy, restrictive back brace, and he is now heavily reliant on prescription painkillers just to stand upright.
The music industry surrounding him, the promoters, the band, Audrey, they all relied on his physical presence to generate income.
Yeah.
There was no mechanism for a 6-month medical leave. The machine demanded that he stand in front of a microphone no matter the physical cost.
The year 1952 becomes a portrait of total collapse. His marriage to Audrey, which had always been volatile, finally implodes. She files for divorce, and it is finalized in May. He is kicked out of his own house and ends up moving in with country singer Ray Price.
And that didn't last long either.
No, Hank's drinking and pill consumption becomes so erratic and destructive that even Price has to move out.
His professional life perfectly mirrors his personal life at this point. He starts missing shows. When he does show up, he is often too intoxicated to perform.
And the establishment finally loses patience. In August 1952, the Grand Ole Opry, the very institution that had brought him out for 6 encores just 3 years earlier, officially fires him.
Wow.
They terminate his membership for habitual drunkenness and unreliability.
It was a stunning fall from grace. He is forced to retreat to Shreveport, Louisiana, returning to the Louisiana Hayride radio show, which was seen as a massive demotion.
His personal life descends into total chaos. He has an affair with a dancer named Bobby Jett. And then, in October 1952, just months after his divorce from Audrey, he marries a woman named Billie Jean Jones.
Right.
And the way they get married is pure spectacle. They don't have a quiet ceremony. They charge the public admission to attend.
They literally sold tickets to their own wedding. 14,000 people bought tickets to watch them get married on stage at the New Orleans Municipal Auditorium.
14,000.
They actually performed the ceremony twice in one day to accommodate the massive crowds. It was a pure cash grab, orchestrated by promoters capitalizing on his chaotic celebrity.
But lurking behind all of this public spectacle is perhaps the darkest figure in the entire Hank Williams story, a man named Horace Toby Marshall.
Toby Marshall is the ultimate parasite. As Hank's pain escalated, he sought out doctors who wouldn't ask questions. He found Marshall. Marshall presented himself as a doctor, but in reality, he was a paroled forger.
A forger.
He had recently been released from the Oklahoma State Penitentiary.
How does a paroled forger convince the biggest music star in the world that he is a medical professional?
Marshall literally bought a fake diploma from a mail-order mill in Chicago for $25. It declared him a doctor of science and psychology.
Wait, I need to pause on this. The man making $1,000 a night, who has Vanderbilt surgeons operating on his spine, puts his daily medical care into the hands of a guy with a $25 fake degree.
Yes.
Why wouldn't Hank's management intervene?
Because Marshall was willing to provide the one thing legitimate doctors were starting to deny Hank: unlimited access to heavy narcotics. Marshall wasn't hired to heal Hank, he was hired to keep him numb enough to get on stage.
And the chemical cocktail Marshall prescribed was staggering. We're talking massive doses of amphetamines to wake him up and then chloral hydrate, Seconal, and morphine to bring him down.
Let's examine the pharmacology of that for a moment. Amphetamines put an immense strain on the cardiovascular system, driving the heart rate dangerously high. To counteract that, Marshall was giving him chloral hydrate, which is an early, highly toxic sedative, essentially a chemical cousin to chloroform. Add to that Seconal, which is a heavy central nervous system depressant barbiturate, and then inject morphine for the spinal pain.
It's a miracle he was standing at all.
You are taking a heart that is already exhausted and repeatedly slamming the gas pedal and the emergency brake at the exact same time. It's a lethal combination.
Which brings us back to the final road trip. It is late December 1952. Hank is physically deteriorating by the hour. He plays what will be his final known public performance at a musicians' union benefit in Montgomery.
Right.
The promoters have him booked for 2 massive holiday shows, Charleston, West Virginia on New Year's Eve and Canton, Ohio on New Year's Day.
The weather intervenes, though. On December 30th, a massive snowstorm blankets the region. All commercial flights out of Montgomery are grounded, but the promoters insist he make the shows.
So Hank hires Charles Carr, a 17-year-old local college student, to drive his Cadillac to the gigs.
17. Just kid.
The timeline of this drive is incredibly grim. They leave Montgomery and make it to a hotel in Birmingham on the first night. The next day, New Year's Eve, they continue driving north and stop at the Andrew Johnson Hotel in Knoxville, Tennessee.
And by the time they reach Knoxville, Hank is barely conscious. He is suffering from the compounding effects of alcohol and the massive doses of chloral hydrate that Marshall had provided.
Carr, the college kid, is terrified. He realizes his passenger is in severe medical distress, so he calls for a doctor to come to the hotel room. This time, a legitimate physician arrives.
Yeah.
But instead of sending Hank to a hospital, the doctor injects him with 2 shots of vitamin B12, which were laced with a 1/4 grain of morphine, to ease his pain.
When it was time to leave the Knoxville hotel, Hank's legs could not support him. The hotel porters literally had to carry his limp body out to the Cadillac and lay him in the back seat.
Meanwhile, Carr is desperately trying to figure out what to do. He gets on the phone, and who is on the other end giving him orders? Toby Marshall, the fake doctor, and the tour promoters. They tell Carr that the Charleston show has been canceled because of the snowstorm, but they order him to just keep driving through the night. They absolutely must make the Canton, Ohio show the next afternoon.
So Carr drives. He is navigating a heavy Cadillac through treacherous, icy, unlit Appalachian Mountain roads. He has been awake for nearly 20 hours.
Right.
At one point, he is so exhausted he stops and briefly hires a relief driver just so he can rest his eyes. They cross the state line into Virginia and then into West Virginia.
Finally, early in the morning on New Year's Day, Carr pulls into a Pure Oil gas station in the small town of Oak Hill, West Virginia. He turns around to check on Hank, perhaps to see if he needs food or a bathroom.
Yeah.
He touches him, and the body is completely stiff.
Rigor mortis.
Hank had likely been dead in the backseat for hours while Carr was driving through the dark. The subsequent autopsy report paints a devastating picture of what the drugs and the pain had done to him.
The cause of death was listed as acute right ventricular dilation, essentially. His heart just gave out, ballooned, and stopped. There were hemorrhages in his heart and his neck.
The autopsy also noted physical trauma on his body from a recent altercation. Hank had apparently gotten into a bar fight in Montgomery just days before the trip. He was battered, his spine was compromised, his heart was failing, and his bloodstream was toxic.
The aftermath of his death was a cultural earthquake. On January 4th, 1953, they brought his body back to Montgomery.
The funeral held at the Montgomery City Auditorium was a spectacle unlike almost anything the South had ever seen for a civilian. An estimated 15,000 to 25,000 people completely surrounded the building, flooding the streets.
25,000 people.
Inside, a silver casket rested on a stage buried under thousands of flowers. Country music legends, men like Roy Acuff and Ernest Tubbs, stood over the casket and sang, "I Saw the Light."
The contrast is jarring, isn't it? You have 20,000 people weeping in the streets of Montgomery, and just days earlier, 3,000 people were laughing at the news of his death in Canton.
And while the fans were mourning, the legal and financial reality of Hank's death triggered a battle that was vicious, complex, and lasted for decades. Hank Williams, despite generating immense wealth for his labels and publishers, died without leaving a will.
Intestacy, dying without a will, is complicated enough for an average person. For someone with an incredibly lucrative catalog of intellectual property, It is a nightmare.
When the lawyers initially opened his estate, the actual liquid assets were shockingly low. He had some cash on him, a cashier's check, and his personal possessions. The total value was appraised at exactly $13,329.25.
But the liquid cash was irrelevant. The real prize was the future royalties and the publishing rights to songs like You're Cheatin' Hard and I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry. Those were worth millions of dollars in future revenue.
The battle lines were drawn almost immediately, and it turned into a three-way war. You had Audrey, the first wife. Even though they were divorced, she claimed she was entitled to half of his royalties based on an agreement they had signed during a previous temporary separation years earlier.
Then you had Billie Jean, the second wife, who demanded her statutory share as the surviving widow.
But then Lily, Hank's mother, enters the fray with a legal nuclear weapon. She doesn't just ask for her share, she files a legal challenge invalidating Billie Jean's entire marriage to Hank.
This is where the legal mechanics get incredibly cutthroat. Lily's lawyers discovered a statutory loophole. Before Billie Jean married Hank, she had been married to someone else.
Okay.
Lily argued that Billie Jean's divorce from her first husband had not been finalized for the legally required waiting period before she married Hank in New Orleans. Therefore, Lily argued, the marriage to Hank was legally void, and Billie Jean was entitled to absolutely nothing.
The threat of total ruin forced Billie Jean's hand. She eventually agreed to a settlement of $30,000 to walk away. She also had to sign an agreement promising to stop billing herself publicly as Mrs. Hank Williams.
So Lily eliminates the second wife, but she still has to deal with Audrey. But just when you think the estate is settled, an entirely new, massive complication is born.
Literally born. Remember Bobby Jett, the dancer Hank had an affair with in 1952, right after his divorce from Audrey. Exactly 5 days after Hank Williams dies in the back of that Cadillac, Bobby Jett gives birth to a baby girl.
The child is named Kathy. Hank had actually executed a pre-birth agreement acknowledging he might be the father and arranging for Lily to take custody of the child. Lily brings the baby in, intending to adopt her and secure her place as an heir.
But Lily dies just 2 years later, in 1955. Control of the estate passes to Hank's sister, Irene.
And Irene makes a drastic decision. She refuses to formally adopt the child. She makes her a ward of the state of Alabama, and Kathy is eventually adopted by an entirely different family.
This family changes her name, and she grows up having absolutely no idea who her biological father is. The estate and the lawyers essentially colluded in the 1960s to bury her existence.
Yeah, they paid off the mother, hid the documents, and pretended Hank Williams only had one child, his son, with Audrey, Hank Jr.
It wasn't until Kathy was 21 years old that her adoptive mother finally told her the truth about her parentage.
But knowing the truth and proving it in court against a multi-million-dollar music machine are two very different things. She had to fight a brutal legal war for her birthright. The estate actively fought to keep her out.
Decades of litigation.
Yes. She finally had to take the case all the way to the Alabama Supreme Court. In 1989, the court reviewed the original custody agreements Hank had signed before his death and officially ruled that she was the biological daughter of Hank Williams and a legal heir to the estate.
Wow.
She changed her name to Jett Williams and finally received her share of the royalties.
It is a staggering irony. The man who was globally celebrated for writing songs of such poignant simplicity, songs that distilled the most complex, painful human emotions into 3 chords and a chorus left behind one of the most ruthless, tangled, and complex legal quagmires in the history of the music business.
And the lawsuits didn't even stop with the heirs. Decades later, a massive legal battle erupts over something that was literally pulled out of a garbage can.
The lost acetates. This is a fascinating story regarding the physical preservation of audio history. Back in 1951, Hank had a morning radio show on WSM sponsored by Mother's Best Flour. Because he was touring constantly and couldn't always be in the Nashville studio at 7:15 a.m., he pre-recorded dozens of these shows.
Right.
How did they pre-record them before the invention of magnetic tape?
They used transcription acetates. An acetate is a heavy, fragile disc, usually made of an aluminum or glass core, coated in a nitrocellulose lacquer. The audio engineer literally cuts the grooves into the lacquer in real time as the band plays in the studio. They were never meant to be permanent archives. They were heavy, fragile, and if you played them too many times, the needle would destroy the soft lacquer grooves.
So once the show aired, WSM had no use for them. By the 1960s, the radio station needed shelf space. They viewed these massive, heavy discs as obsolete garbage. They ordered an employee to throw them away.
A station photographer named Les Leverett happened to be walking by the dumpster. He saw the discs, realized they contained the only existing audio of Hank Williams performing certain songs, and he physically rescued them from the trash.
That's incredible.
They took them home and stored them in his closet for decades.
Decades later, when the existence of these pristine, unreleased recordings became public, a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit erupted. The record labels claimed they owned the audio. The heirs claimed they owned the audio. The battle over recordings that the industry had literally thrown in the garbage went on for years.
But what is truly remarkable is that despite the lawsuits, despite the greed of the enablers, and despite the tragic brevity of his life, the actual art refused to be buried. The music survived the litigation.
It did more than survive. It continued to evolve. The industry recognized this in 2010 when the Pulitzer Prize Board awarded Hank a special posthumous citation, acknowledging his pivotal role in transforming country music into a major cultural and artistic force in American life.
A Pulitzer Prize is the ultimate validation of his songwriting genius, proving that his work was literature, not just disposable pop entertainment.
But for me, the most beautiful and haunting part of his lingering legacy isn't the Pulitzer. It is the story of the lost notebooks.
When Hank was touring, grinding out thousands of miles in the backseat of cars, he carried a simple brown leather briefcase. Inside that briefcase, he kept notebooks.
Yeah.
Whenever a thought, a fragment of poetry, or a verse came into his head, he would jot it down. He didn't write musical notation, just lyrics.
After he died, 4 of these notebooks were recovered. They contained 66 unpublished, unrecorded songs, just lyrics sitting on a page. And for decades, they were locked away in a fireproof vault at the Acufro's publishing offices. They were ghosts.
Until the early 2000s, the publishing company finally decided to do something with them, and they approached the perfect person, Bob Dylan.
Oh, that makes sense.
Dylan, who had always revered Hank Williams, was asked to champion a project to bring these orphaned lyrics to life.
Dylan reviewed the notebooks. He even shared some of the lyrics with Hank's granddaughter, Holly Williams. She later said that when she read the words on the page, she instantly recognized her grandfather's voice in the cadence of the syllables.
Dylan assembled a massive, diverse roster of artists. You had Jack White, Norah Jones, Merle Haggard, Sheryl Crow, and Holly Williams herself. Their task was daunting. They had to compose the music to fit the rhythm of Hank's unwritten melodies.
The result was released in 2011 as an album called The Lost Notebooks of Hank Williams. It was a literal mechanical resurrection of his voice 60 years after his death.
It proved that Hank Williams set the ultimate template for the authentic singer-songwriter. He proved that you do not need formal conservatory training to express universal human truths. You just need to tell the truth.
But knowing everything we have discussed today, the spina bifida, the absent father, the ruthless stage mother, the paroled forger prescribing chloral hydrate, the agony of the spinal fusion, I have to ask, does knowing the sheer, grinding physical reality of his life change how you hear the music?
It definitely changes the context.
When he steps up to a microphone and sings, "I'm so lonesome I could cry," it is not a poetic abstraction. It is a medical, physical, and psychological broadcast from a man whose spine was literally failing him and whose life was spinning completely out of control.
It certainly removes the romanticism. We often romanticize the tortured artist. But the reality of Hank Williams wasn't a romantic melancholy. It was biological agony and chemical dependency. His genius was his ability to translate that specific horrible agony into a frequency that millions of people could relate to their own everyday heartbreaks.
He lived 29 years in near constant pain. The result was music that will easily outlast every single one of us. He went from a $3.50 secondhand guitar in the depths of the Alabama Depression to a posthumous Pulitzer Prize.
The definition of a meteor.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. The fact that we are still finding his lost recordings in radio station trash cans and unearthing his orphan lyrics in leather briefcases decades after he died in the snow tells us something profound. Hank Williams isn't just a fixed figure in a history book. He is an ongoing project.
Yeah, that's really well said.
It makes you wonder how many other ghosts are sitting in the archives of our culture, buried in vaults or thrown in dumpsters, just waiting to be discovered. How many lost notebooks are out there, needing someone to put a melody to their unfinished words? Next time you hear a classic piece of music, I want you to ask yourself, what was the actual physical cost of those 3 minutes of audio?